South Africa has been in the spotlight regarding its foreign policy stance on its non-alignment in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Since the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Russia's President Vladimir Putin in March this year, the country has been under pressure to arrest him should he set foot in South Africa for that BRICS Summit, which is going to take place in August. Well, let's talk more on international matters, including domestic issues that affect us here in South Africa. Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, grateful for your visit in studio this morning. Thank you very much for availing yourself. Let's begin with these reports suggesting that the BRICS Summit could be moved to another country. Credible reports?
The Minister of International Relations and Cooperation has clarified that the BRICS Summit is not going anywhere. We are hosting the BRICS Summit, and it's our turn to chair the BRICS, and we're going to host it in South Africa.
Closely linked to that question, though, are comments that were made by the Secretary General of the governing party, the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, saying on Wednesday that South Africa is, and I want to use the specific word he used, is constrained to host President Putin when a question was put to him, is President Putin going to be in attendance? And so I ask this question again, whether there is a possibility that this summit could be moved elsewhere because of that element of President Putin.
I've just said to you that the Minister of International Relations, who is the lead person in terms of organizing the BRICS Summit, and she's hosting the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the BRICS this weekend in Cape Town. They started, I think, yesterday. She has confirmed to you yesterday that the summit is going nowhere. It's going to be hosted in South Africa because we are the member of BRICS. Where do we move it to?
There has been suggestions. For example, the reports that came out yesterday said China might possibly be waiting in the wings, or it could possibly be Mozambique. So you're saying there are no such discussions taking place?
I'm reinforcing the message of the Minister of International Relations that South Africa will host BRICS Summit. And by the way, on China, I don't know if you have heard 60,000 cases resurgent of coronavirus. So I don't think, even if you wanted to, it can't go back to China because of that. But the Minister of DECO has confirmed that the summit is going nowhere. And who am I? The Minister of DECO will be the supporting host of the President. And she says she's staying in the country, and it will stay in the country.
Well, you use the words, who am I? You are a minister in the Presidency who also has just been announced as being among the envoys that will be sent to G7 countries to go and explain the country's stance on this Russia-Ukraine conflict. So perhaps let's begin with your trip to Russia and Ukraine recently. Any information that you'd be willing to share with us on progress in trying to bring these two sides to the negotiating table?
I must clarify, I didn't go to Ukraine. Otherwise, the President will then say, who gave you permission? But I've sent a team to Ukraine, an advanced team to Ukraine, to deal with some of the matters that are at hand and which helps us to plan for the interventions of the President and to brief our President on the matters. I cannot brief you on that one. But in terms of on the visit to Russia, I was attending the annual meeting, which was on its 11th iteration this year. And of course, on the sidelines of that meeting of high-ranking security officers or officials, we had side meetings, bilaterals with our Russian counterparts, and we discussed the issue of whether they are keen on this on peaceful resolution to the conflict, and they indicated that they were keen. We asked other permutations, what are the options available, and they clarified their positions. They've clarified, for instance, that they had previously agreed with Ukraine on a resolution of matters. There were points that were done in Istanbul, and they said then Ukraine withdrew from the agreement between the two parties. And so we wanted to make sure that our initiative does not then suffer the same fate. The initiative of the presidents of Africa does not suffer the same fate. And they indicated what would be their minimums, and will have informed our president of their minimums.
But how will you ensure that this initiative by the African heads of state does not suffer the same fate as what happened in Turkey, when there are constant visits to the one side? You have just admitted that you only went to Russia, but in Ukraine you have sent an advanced team. How's that going to work?
No, so the intention was that I would go to Ukraine, but unfortunately, given the time, I think the presidents will make the announcement, if it has not been made, of when are they traveling to Ukraine and to Russia soon. So the time in between will not have allowed me to then go to Ukraine. But the plan was the delegation we've sent is quite high level to Ukraine to engage, and our president has been talking to President Zelensky on the phones on the matters at hand. So I don't think there is a feeling in the Ukraine that we are biased to one party or the other. They accept that we are independent and we are neutral. And I must just remind what many people forget. The ally of the ANC then during the struggle was the USSR. The USSR included Ukraine, by the way. And if you recall, the capital of the USSR, before it was Moscow, it was Kyiv. So this notion that it's Russia is only one of our allies. Ukraine was part of our allies in the struggle for freedom. So we must keep that in context.
Which is why some of the ANC's combatants were trained in Ukraine. That's why then people of South Africa will somewhat be confused when belatedly the message starts going out that, no, we're not just leaning to one side. Ukraine is a former ally as well. Well, of course, under the arrangement of the USSR then. So again, Minister Ntshavheni, I want to ask this question, why it is that South African officials, whether it's at government level or at party level, the ANC recently was in Russia, the Speaker of Parliament was recently in Russia, but I haven't heard until recently that there is a delegation sent to Ukraine. In fact, can you actually tell us who, when you say it's a high-level delegation that's been sent to Ukraine, who exactly is in Ukraine from South Africa?
So let me start with the issue that you raised about people going to Russia. And I would not want to speak for the governing party. But the people who have gone to Russia, in particular from the government level, they've been attending conferences that have been pre-arranged before this conflict, before this war between Russia and Ukraine. Those conferences were set in place, and because we are government, remember, things are scheduled, and they went to attend. Unfortunately, Ukraine has not been hosting any conferences for us to go and attend because of the countries at war. You can't even go without making sure that there's some security arrangement of you to travel there.
Well, that's because the country is being decimated.
Yes, but that's exactly the reason why there has not been delegations that needed to go. And you asked that the level of the delegation we've sent to Ukraine, we've sent at a level of a DDG, and because I was going to go with a DG myself when I went there, but a DDG is not a junior level at all, and those are the people who have been to Ukraine to talk about what we are doing. Actually, another one of the DDGs is going back to Ukraine, if not today's Friday. Yeah, it leaves today for Ukraine. And that is the work that we've been doing with Ukraine. I think, let me make you one acknowledgement, is that we have been weak at communicating the government position. We have not clarified that properly because it had come in anecdotes and what the media then translated and interpreted as. And I think the envoys and our coming out to clarify, if you recall, I was the first one to issue a statement proactively to say I'm going to Russia and this is the reason I'm going to Russia. Right. And that has not been done, and it was as if it was a secret. So what has happened now is not a belated issue, it's the issue of improving on our communication as government.
So let me pick up on that then. When you say government has been weak in articulating its position, You are now going to be heading out to G7 countries to explain this non-aligned stance. What will you be saying exactly to these countries?
Well, we just announced day before yesterday. We'll need the briefing from the president to say this is what you need to say.
So we don't know our position as we stand?
No, we know what our position is. I'm saying our position is we are non-aligned. We are seeking a peaceful resolution, and we are mediating on that one. And maybe I must also indicate we're not the only one who are talking about our non-alignment and maintaining our sovereignty and not take position based on other countries. If you go, I think last week, the president of France, President Macron, it spoke about strategic, what did he call it? Strategic autonomy in the issue of Russia and Ukraine. And but the issue is that we are hell-bent on focusing on what South Africa is doing. I don't know if you're aware that other countries in Europe continue to buy gas and oil from Russia, even with the U.S. sanctions. But you talk about it as if it's only South Africa. And we have not even bought oil. In fact, if we had bought oil from Russia, it would be cheaper. You know, the problems we're facing of the prices will be different. So, but if you go and look at what Germany is doing and what France is doing in terms of their economic relations with Russia, it hasn't changed before the U.S. sanctions because
that can't be true.
It's not the U.S.
It's not true.
Go and check.
Minister Ntshavheni, it's not true.
Go and check.
Let me tell you what recent reports are suggesting, what Germany is doing. Scaling down in its missions in Russia. That does not talk about a Germany that has not changed its stance. Supporting the sanctions on Russia.
Scaling down, not withdraw. They could have, when did the sanctions start? The U.S. sanctions? It's not the UN sanctions. When did the U.S. sanctions start? Let's go there. They didn't stop. They could have cut out. We are governments. When we want to cut off, we cut off and we move out. They did not cut out. They scaled down because strategically they looked after their national interests.
Yeah.
And they even remember when the sanctions were starting, the U.S. sanctions were starting, it must be clear the U.S. sanctions were starting. They were very clear to say they cannot just blindly go into the sanctions because it has impact for their access to gas and access to oil for their citizens and their countries.
I must go to a break, but I need to put this question to you quickly before we go there. So this delegation of envoys to go and explain South Africa's position to the G7 countries, is there more to it? I mean, why would explaining our stance require special envoys to go to these? There is something embedded, isn't there?
No, remember, governments do not work in terms of what I announce as a cabinet spokesperson in a press conference. And they work in terms of discussing to say, what is your reasoning, what is your rationale, and what are your national interests that you're protecting. You can't have that over a telephone. You can't have that over a media briefing in South Africa. You need to engage with your counterparts on a face-to-face arrangement. I'll give you a reason. You didn't want me to do this interview from the phone at home. You wanted me to come here because you wanted this type of engagement. So that's how government works. That's how diplomacy works. Yeah. Because in the room, on a face-to-face level, you are able to have a candid and frank discussion of issues and clarify each other and the positions that you hold and what informs you. And that is what is behind sending envoys. And that's why we said we had not done it before, and then that's why we're doing it more now to make sure our position is clarified, because we think and we know that there's a serious misinterpretation. It has always been based on what the headlines or Limgambi and Newzroom will put out to say. Khumbudzo Ntshavheni said that, Cyril Ramaphosa, the President of the Republic of South Africa, said that, Naledi Pandor, the Minister of DECO in South Africa, has said that, but not the detail of saying what is the rationale behind it and what is the end goal and what is our purpose.
The possibility of indirect sanctions on South Africa is a topic I want to pick up on, because that's the reason for that question as to why would a special envoy be sent to communicate South Africa's position on this war. So we pick up on that when we return. You're watching Newsfeed AM. If you're just joining us, we are in conversation with Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, and still discussing the matters related to international matters. Minister Ntshavheni, the possible impact of indirect, or what some have termed secondary sanctions on South Africa. This sparked by the diplomatic furore between South Africa and the United States. And what is it all about? Lady R. Let's start with whether South Africa is worried that we could be slapped with indirect sanctions, as the Reserve Bank warned.
Look, we have no control of what the U.S. government decides to do. What we have control of is clarifying our position and also being transparent of what we are doing. And on the Lady R matter, Judge Mujapilu has been announced as the chairperson of the inquiry, and he has been given 6 weeks to conduct the inquiry and 2 weeks to provide 2 weeks thereafter to finalize the report and give the report to the president. And we certainly will avail that report to South Africans and to everyone who's interested on that report. That's the first part. And because we have nothing to hide as a government. I've indicated during when you were asking the questions around Lady R as a media, I've indicated that the National Conventional Arms Control Committee has not set and approved any arms to be sold to Russia or to Belarus. And we include Belarus because there was a DA parliamentary question that was asked whether we sold arms to Belarus. And I don't know the link between Belarus and Russia. Don't ask me that one. But the National Conventional Arms Control Committee did not approve such a sale. And they will not be in South Africa unless somebody is really conducting a treasonous act. There will not be a sale of any arms from government that are done through Armsco and Dinel, that will be sold to any country without the approval of the National Conventional Arms Control Committee. So we're very clear about that. If there has been any mischief by anyone, but it will not be on the arms from this government. If there's any mischief from anyone, that person will then face the consequence of the law. But on our part, there's not been any authorization. And that's the LADR thing. The second issue is the clarity that we've been providing around our non-alignment status. We're not the first envoys to be going to the G7. The National Security Advisor of the President, Dr. Sidney Mofamadi, and the delegation went to the US, to Washington, to explain the position of government on both Lady R and non-alignment. And there was progress in terms of the feedback that was given. And I need to also clarify that the inquiry decision was not a decision that was taken now because of the trip to US. It was a decision that was taken earlier. But because of a number of things that we needed to do in terms of ascertaining what would be the best route, it took longer for the president to announce that decision, even before the U.S. ambassador made noise about the Lady R story and the allegations that were made. The decision was already in place. And for us, we can only communicate to everybody what is our position. And that's why the envoys, to clarify the position. But our focus is not even about clarifying the position. Our focus is to making sure there's a peaceful resolution of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And that work we had to get other African countries to come with us to say we are all non-aligned, we all have an interest in the resolution of this conflict. Can we find mechanism of going there? They will announce shortly when are the presidents leaving. In fact, somebody has already announced next week the presidents will go to Ukraine and to Russia to do the opening engagements, because remember there must be a ceasefire before the negotiations take place, to do the direct engagements with those leaders to finalize the position of how the mediation should take place, to agree on the terms of the mediation, and then this a summit to deal with that will then come.
Now that reports are coming out, Minister Ntshavheni, that the U.S., or should we say Washington, did not sanction Ambassador Brigitte to utter the statements that he did. does that change South Africa's complexion, or does it change South Africa's relationship with the current ambassador? Where are things now that there seems to be some kind of admission that he was not sanctioned to say the things that he said? What is South Africa's attitude, perhaps, is a question towards him?
So, and there's a point that the media missed and everybody missed. Ambassador Piketty was the first ambassador from the Western countries to be demarched in the Republic of South Africa. And we don't take the decision to demarch an ambassador lightly. You have hardly heard of us having demarched an ambassador, because it's not a light mechanism. It's not a light step to take. It's a very high step to take. We took that because the conduct of Ambassador Piketty was creating a falsehood that there's tension between Pretoria and Washington, which that falsehood is not correct. Yes, we have differences, like we have had. We have not always agreed on positions, not only now. Previously, we have not agreed on a number of issues. For instance, we didn't agree on our position on Cuba. We do not agree on our position on Western Sahara. We don't agree on their position on Israel. And it's not new, but that has always been managed within the purview of the diplomatic relations, and properly so, and those differences. And Ambassador Piketty then decided to act against that, even without the sanction of Washington. And that's why we're very clear to demarch him. Yes, it shows that we have a very dim view of him. And if, from the allegations he made on Lady R, when they are proven different, we are going to then demand more severe actions against
What does that mean? Expulsion?
It means anything, but we are going to demand more severe actions from them. And we are happy that the Washington has come out and clarified that they didn't sanction him to make such utterances, because it restores the cordiality of our relationship. We accept each other's sovereignty, and also accept that we will differ on one view or the other. They prefer us to be aligned with them, and we're saying we are non-aligned, and our non-alignment is better to find a peaceful resolution to the thing.
All right, I want to wrap this conversation around the Russia-Ukraine conflict in this way, and that is that former President Mbeki recently said South Africa cannot act illegally. We've already done that, by the way, and a court said we were wrong by letting al-Bashir go because our international obligations were not observed by South Africa. What will you be saying to the G7 countries about the possible travel to South Africa by President Putin?
If President Putin has been invited to attend the summit.
He is invited, I can tell you that very explicitly, because the Minister of International Relations has said.
That's what I'm confirming. He has been invited to attend. When he gives us an indication that he'll attend, we'll then clarify, we'll announce, like everybody, all the confirmations that he's attending, and we'll do so in line with the provisions of our laws, and we'll do so in full compliance of our responsibilities.
So that means he's not coming. I think that much is clear.
Who says he's not coming?
If we are to observe our international obligations, we can't let another head of state, or let another person, forget that he's a head of state, let another person who has an arrest warrant from the ICC, which we are signatory to, let him go out of the country.
Don't jump the gun.
Okay. Let's then talk about South Africa's interests, domestic interests, in this international political game. We have much to lose if indeed we are going to upset our major trading partners. Why am I saying this? We are in the grips of a cholera outbreak. There is a total, at least from what we learned yesterday, of 4 billion rand that is needed to fully rehabilitate Rooiwal. Where do you think we're going to get that money if international sanctions are going to start being imposed on us?
The problem that we have as South Africans is that we like to create an unnecessary panic about our environment and situation, and want to believe that We have a very incompetent government that acts outside the national interests of its country. And that is not correct. And let me give you a few things. We are the first ones to acknowledge that, for instance, the U.S. is our major trading partner globally. And we have always sought to find agreement with the U.S. But the problem with South Africans, we want to conflate issues. The AGOA discussions are being conflated with our non-alignment position on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And I want
That's not our own doing. That's Brigitte's doing.
Slowly. You give me time to speak, and then you come in, okay? And then we have, and I want to take you back to AGOA's discussion, because AGOA's renewal is not the first time. Remember the chicken issue when they were threatening to sanction South Africa or to pull South Africa out of AGOA because we were insisting that we need to protect our chicken. We caved in, and what happened to the chicken industry in this country? It got wiped out.
Squeezed.
And not squeezed, wiped out. And there was a problem. The other time they were squeezing us, I remember it was on the vehicles. You remember. And because there's a notion outside of South Africa, outside there, that says South Africa is no longer a developing country. And that narrative did not start now. And again, I must blame us for not communicating. In 2019, they were already saying in preparation of the renewal of AGOA, and 2019 they were saying in preparation of the renewal of AGOA, South Africa does not qualify to be classified as a developing country. That notion is out there. And that's what's informing them on their position on AGOA. It's not necessarily the Russia issue. The Russia issue comes in, Russia-Ukraine issue comes in when there are already those plans. And we have been fighting as a government to say, we are still a developing country. Yes, we've got a developed part and the developing one, but the majority, the bulk of this country is the developing one. And therefore, you cannot then classify us as a developed country. And that is the problem, that as South Africans, we want to straitjacket the issues which are not straitjacketed. And you say it's bigotry problem. But the U.S. have already come out and disowned a position of their own ambassador. It should tell you something about the standing of Ambassador Bigot.
All right. I want to latch on the words that you used, that we like to take a dim view of this government as, and I quote you now, as being incompetent. Whilst we are on the health matters, the outgoing health ombud, Professor Makgoba, sat on this table on Thursday, and he said he does not believe under this government, under this current government, that the NHI can successfully be implemented. Those aren't our words. Those are the words of the man who had to deal with complaints coming out of, in particular, the public health care sector. Who's saying you are incompetent?
Actually, I'm lucky that Professor Makgoba is, I consider, if he was my age, I would say I'll consider him a friend. But it's somebody I talk to, it's somebody I relate to very well. I didn't hear his interview, but I've read the report he has published. He didn't say under the government the NHI will not happen. He said there must be improvements, which we have also acknowledged ourselves in government, on how things are done to make sure that the NHI is successfully implemented. And he also pointed out to recommendations of what should be done. For instance, all of us know that in Gauteng, for instance, Gauteng health has been a problem, not now, for the longest time. And remember, they suffered the medical, legal challenges, my bulk of their budgets there. There have been a number of challenges on the Gauteng health. But he has also acknowledged the improvements that we have had. Limpopo has done sterlingly well in terms of health. And I'm just giving you the two contrast. Yeah. And he has even acknowledged that, and says, for these following provinces, they could go and get lessons from these other provinces. And I'm giving you that to say, I didn't listen to the context that he has given. Because, to take anecdotes of what people say, outside of the context of how they say it, it's a dangerous discussion, more especially, so I don't want to comment on his view, but he has been supporting this government, by the way, Professor Makgoba, in particular in the health sector, to make sure that there's been an improvement. His tenure ends, and it's because he's also He's also wise, old. Not, I didn't say that.
But the main thing here, the main source of worry for him is the level of, I think, competence. And you brought up that word. Let me then move the discussion along what you identified as security threats linked to our power crisis situation. This was in your recent budget votes, and I just want to quote directly. Security structures have identified key threats against the performance of Eskom requiring urgent attention. Would you like to take us into confidence about that? What's going on?
A number of things. When you have what you call them, load shedding, you have had a rise in crimes during those times across provinces. And it's a major issue that you can have 4 hours of load shedding. That's why we do not prefer an elongated period of load shedding. We want the stabilization, and Minister Ramkhopa spoke about it day before yesterday at the Presidency budget debate vote, that by December he'll want to stabilize load shedding to lower levels and the frequency thereof to lower levels, because it has resulted in high crimes. You've seen in the Eastern Cape, in the Western Cape, I think also in Gauteng to some level, wherein criminals take the opportunity of load shedding to then go and do criminal acts. Where the police, and in fact the Justice and Crime Prevention Cluster, has been working, and we have now put a strategy to deal with those hotspot areas where there have been an increase in crimes during the period of load shedding. That is one. But second issue is the issue that the load shedding does. It impacts on small businesses who are the biggest creators of jobs. And those people who are in small businesses, therefore they are not able, even big companies, they have to shed jobs because they cannot run the companies. I remember, I think it's 3 weeks ago, when there was a very high stage of load shedding, one car manufacturing company could not do operations. So if that is sustained, you're going to have a problem that they'll have to retrench because they can only afford employment as it creates, as they produce, and even on any other business. And therefore it will increase the number of unemployment for people. And that unemployment rate, when an idle youth or an idle mind, they say it's a dangerous mind, because they then preoccupy themselves with wrong things, and which may tend to be criminal activities. The third issue is the unaffordability. Because of load shedding, the cost of living is getting higher because companies now are producing on an expensive rate. I'll give you an example. When I was previously the Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, we had an agreement with the telecommunications company around data prices and the mechanism of reducing data prices. And they came back to me and said, Minister, look, we are spending more money now on diesel to keep the towers going, because if we don't have diesel, the towers cannot, the telecommunications cannot go on. There could not be communication, and it makes us vulnerable to crime. And therefore, we cannot, the impact of our ability to reduce the cost of data is not possible. And when that happens, when it affects a whole lot of other things, it will mean the cost of communication goes up, it will mean the cost of food goes up, it means the cost of everything goes up. So that on its own, it's a recipe of a country that can be threatened by its own citizenry because of the impact of load shedding on its own.
That's a major statement.
And that is why there's a direct focus from the Presidency, both at NICOM level and also at the Minister, and the Presidency chairs NICOM, to make sure we resolve the load shedding issue. And that's why in that budget speech, if you go down in the very same paragraph, we said the challenges of Eskom must be resolved as a matter of agency, and load shedding must be ended as a matter of agency.
Here's another crucial element that you've omitted. I'll hope that it's because it's not readily in your mind, but we cannot forget, Minister Ntshavheni. You've mentioned crime, you've mentioned unemployment as a direct cause of the power crisis. But
and cost of living.
There are people who are literally dying as a result of load shedding. A case has actually been opened against government for the death of a 3-year-old who was on a machine. They died. It's being blamed on load shedding. Morally, just morally speaking, as a government that claims to care, is that a case that you're willing to go to court to defend?
You'd have to go to court to defend because, and I'm not a doctor, because there are a number of, when a person dies, there's a cost to the death, and that must be explained medically. And that until that medical explanation, it has to be, and that issue must be ventilated to get us a consensus of saying, is the cause the load shedding? But it's what we have acknowledged as government, and that's why we've put measures. All hospitals were supposed to put mechanisms to make sure that when the power goes down, they have generators that kick on. And that's the conversations that have been had, and you have had a number of hospitals, because the cost of the generators have been a problem, there have been exemptions, gradual exemptions of hospitals from load shedding. And people who reside next to hospitals, some of those hospitals have come through. And that's why when the UDM who went to court around exempting all hospitals, we said we cannot afford it, but we can do it on a gradual and graduated process mechanism, and we are building up to make sure at some point all hospitals will be exempt from load shedding.
Final question to you, and I suppose it encompasses everything that is happening in South Africa, whether you talk the deaths as a result of cholera, which is spreading, by the way. Just the other day, you were emphatic that it is confined to Hammanskraal. No, it's not. People have died now in another province, in Mpumalanga. So, in the midst of load shedding as well, as I put to you, people are dying. Are you at all worried at the level of cabinet, at the waning public confidence against the Ramaphosa administration? Do you take to heart what, at least some of what John Steenhuisen had to say in Parliament, and that is that it would seem that this president has quietly resigned some time ago?
So maybe let me start on the cholera cases. And the Minister of Health has been saying they are tracing the cases in the other provinces, that they are not a result of travel from Hammanskraal, for example. You remember the two cases that were reported in Northwest? That originated, is the cases that were originating from Hammanskraal. Similarly, a case that was reported in Limpopo, it had originated from Hammanskraal. So the Minister of Health says they are tracing the cases in Mpumalanga and in Free State, whether they have not originated, they are not the same cases that had been in Hammanskraal and people travel. And that's what we need to. And unfortunately, cholera is a contagious disease. So you have cholera, and we interact. I transmit it to you.
Minister Ntshavheni, let me do this. We are out of time. I'm simply asking about the waning public confidence in this administration.
I need to come to that now, but I needed to clarify the other point you made. Look, where we are very worried about the public confidence that is purportedly waning. And I say purportedly because when we go, remember we've been doing the in-business, when we go to communities, when we go to interact with communities as government, we have a different feel. People complain about certain things, and we have confidence in you to do certain things. So we should not narrow it. Minister Steenhuisen can politic because it's a campaign season, but we should not drive a narrative that we want it to be self-fulfilling. That's why at a government level we said we're also going to interact directly with the public and gauge for ourselves. And from those interactions, and you are welcome to come along, and the media has been coming along, people have been given a different feedback. And it's not true. The president has not resigned. The president is very much in charge. If I tell you the targets we've been given and the timelines we've been given, I'm in trouble, and all ministers are in trouble. He'll communicate the priorities he has given us and the timelines he has given us to show that we are concerned about the pace of delivery as this government.
All right. I can see that you're itching to get up from that chair. I'm going to ask you to just sit exactly where you are while I close the show. Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, Minister in the Presidency, let's thank her for coming through to explain some of the pressure that is being felt by many in our country.